conference on education and research. That would be in Las Vegas from 17th to 20th April. You're more than welcome to go onto the website and get the details for that. And then there's another one, which is an interesting concept called GLOBE, Global Conference on Business and Economics. GLOBE actually will be having 4 conferences under the banner of GLOBE related to services management, hospitality, tourism, and entertainment and leisure management. And then the graduate conference about business and economics management. But the good part about this is there's only one fee for all these 4 conferences, so attendees can go into any of these conferences. And the main motive was to have this multi and interdisciplinary sort of conference where people do not have barriers. So you can go into any of the stand-up presentations or poster presentations, stuff like that. The location for the conference is Sarasota. Those of you who have not been to Sarasota, I will urge you to go to Google and check the Sarasota. It's really a heaven on earth. So you'll really enjoy your stay here. For the webinars, we do have recordings of all the previous webinars that were done under ANAHEI. So you can go on the website and you can watch those webinars there. And also it will give you an idea of what are the upcoming webinars that we are going to organize. So today's webinar, it's about scale development. It's more related to measurements and stuff like that. Those of you who are working on questionnaires, it's going to be very, very beneficial for you. The speaker today would be Dr. Babak Taheri. He is actually an associate professor of marketing at the business management department, which is Heroic Watt University in Edinburgh, Scotland. And I'll just quickly talk a little bit about what he does. So he has dual research foci, and one of them is consumer behavior. The other one is marketing management. But he does have a very particular interest in tourism and hospitality area and heritage area and stuff like that. Dr. Babak has done over 80 academic publications in a short span of time, which is very impressive. He also acts as a deputy chair of tourism marketing, which is a special interest group under Academy of Marketing in the UK. He is on editorial review boards for key journals. He's also acting as an associate editor for SSCI Index Journal. Some of the journals which he is serving for as editorial board member are Services Industries Journal, a very, very good journal, and also have a newly appointed editor-in-chief who is doing really well with the journal. And then International Journal of Contemporary Hospitality Management. Again, this is the best hospitality journal there. And then Tourism Management Perspectives, which is a sister journal for tourism management. That is the best tourism journal out there. He is currently editing 2 special issues for these journals he's working with. One of them is Services Industry Journal. The other one is International Journal of Contemporary Hospitality Management. If you have any questions about these special issues, you are more than welcome to email Babak, and he will be happy to answer you about these special issues. And he has impressively raised and secured over £2.5 million in funding for research projects. So that's a very short introduction about Babak. He is much more than what is written right here on the slides. And I'll now ask him to continue with the presentation so that you can all know what I know about him. Thank you, Babak, for doing this.
Hello.
Yes.
Can you see me? Hello. Hello.
Yes, Babak, you can go ahead.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for introduction by Faizan Ali, and also thank you very much for Jihan for arranging this web seminars. I'm just going to share my screen about the slides, and we can start talking about the scale development, which is very interesting topic, but also just trying to share. So can you see my screen, Faizan? Yeah, okay, good. So I will talk about the scale development today in this webinar, and I will also share my experience of developing a couple of scale from my previous research. But before going to the detail, I would like to say a little bit about scale development. Before starting to gather my information for this webinar, I look at a couple of papers I would look at actually the last 5 years, any paper published in the area of scale development in different journals, in business and management journals, and also in, which is my field, hospitality and tourism. I noticed, although they say there is a consistency between and the way they approach the scale development, but it seems like sometimes lacking from following particular procedure. And also, it seems like my understanding, and looking at these papers and these interesting papers, what is the main message is to have a clean and clear idea of what you want to gain from scale development, and how you want to approach the scale development from your research perspective. Why is scale development? Scale development is one of the vital approaches for associating abstract concept. By abstract concept, I mean, for example, personal motivation or a particular attitude or behavior to empirical, according to particular rules and appropriate overarching theory. So what is important here is having a good overarching theory. For example, it can be a destination formation, it can be a technology acceptance model, or can be some more abstract sort of overarching theory like co-creation of value or negotiation, etc. What is important here to have to read through all the literature happening in this area and have a good sense of why we need to develop this scale and why this is important for the field. So the main question you need to ask, you need to define the concept and subcomponent of that concept. How? There are different procedures can be followed, and also you need to think about why these particular approaches, why this different steps is important for you. So I will ask these 5 questions before I start in doing a scale development. Is there any scale for measuring the potential concept you have in your mind? So you need to go outside and search for if there are any potential scale available for any particular concept you want to measure. Why you want to measure that? Why do you need a new scale for this? So you need to think about why this particular new scale is important. Again, you need to do your homework. You need to go out and search. So don't rush it. Please spend more time on doing the homework and background check of if there are scale available. Is it a multidimensional or monodimensional concept? So some concepts, let's say motivation, some motivations might have a different components. So personal motivation, social motivation. So you want to make sure if it's a unidimensional or is a multidimensional concept. What are the potential applications for the new scale? Are there any potential application? Why do we need this new scale? And how this new scale is going to be important to the field? What is going to add to the new field? So that's very important as well. This is about further validation of existing scale. We're not going to talk today, but sometimes a concept or a scale is developed in a particular field, and you want to see if that can be applied in other fields. So you go through a little bit of more scale development phrases, and you want to see if these phases is true. Maybe you want to apply in different concept, you want to add a new construct to you know, to the overarching theory, etc. But it's not something we want to talk today about. It just is you need to bear in mind, and you will see a couple of papers. They did the follow-up studies of further developing the existing construct and concept. So the main steps by looking at the different papers available outside, we could see there are 5 different steps. So domain definition, item generation, item reduction, initial validation, final validation, and or test, retest reliability. I took this from the Churchill's very old paper, but it still is one of the best papers from my view, written about scale development. Devil's interesting book, and Netmeyer, nice book as well, and it's a paper I published myself as well. Well, what is important here, remember in the beginning I said that some people, they don't, some of this procedure, some of these steps are missing in some papers. And I have noticed some papers, they don't do the final validation or test, retest reliability, for example. So you will see quite a lot of papers that just stop in the stage step 4. So step 1. So what we do here is a domain definition, a careful examination of the literature. So what we want to do, we want to look at the existing literature in the field and see if how the existing literature define the concept. Maybe you could put all these, for example, if it's about personality, how the personality been perceived from the people in the sociology, psychology, from mainstream marketing, in tourism. You could put a different definition in the table and see how they actually evaluate this concept. Which area, so if it's a specific area like tourism and hospitality, for example, or is a general management area, you want to develop a scale for a specific area or general marketing and management. I would recommend to develop something is more general. So everybody else, not just a context and content specific. Theoretical definition, that's very important. You need to, as I said, maybe is a good idea to have a table of putting all these different interesting ideas and concepts together. Theoretical dimensionality, again, if you look at the different literature, you might see different dimension of the particular concept you have in your mind. What do you want to measure? That's very important, and what is included in the construct, again, about the dimensionality and the construct. Churches has a nice quote about the importance of the literature review. I will really encourage you to do the literature review before moving to do the scale development paper. Looking at the step 2 is so far is about item generation. Again, this step is quite important. I got explain a little bit more about what we do in the item generation stage. So it's basically is a very qualitative stage, although some people, they use quantitative and they use quantitative approach here as well, but the main is very qualitative and subjective by referring back to the literature review. So it can be inductive and deductive. So develop an item based on existing theory is the deductive one, as probably most of you know, and inductive theory item develop items based on the experience or experiment. So what we're trying to do here is basically interviewing people and or qualitatively approaching people to see if there are existing, if they have any idea or any perspective about the items or the quotes, etc. you gather from the literature, and you have a pool of sort of concepts or statements, and you want to check by asking other people's opinion about it. Hybrid processes, a thematic approach idea, which is getting more popular now in the, although it's from 1988, but it's getting more popular now in qualitative studies. Basically, when you do deductive inductive approach together. And I would say, although we don't mention it in, if you look at the scale development papers, but these process is most of the people actually they doing this process, but they're not mentioning. I think it's better to have a look to the book and see how he approached this particular process. But it's basically, I think we need to do both. So we know the concept from the literature, but we also adding the perspective of the other people here. So I'll give you an example. Develop a scale and measure the reason people drink coffee. So our construct, this is just something I come up with, coffee drinking motivation. Theory is behind it, which I said in the beginning, is overarching theories for socialization, relaxation, and coping. So the items you're looking at it, for example, is when I drink coffee, it's usually in order to have a fun with my friends. So it's about socialization. You want to have fun with other people. I am more likely to drink coffee every day. So you want to cope with the situation happening in your daily life because it gives you energy, etc. When I drink coffee, it makes me calm. Again, that's like a more relaxation. You drink coffee to be relaxed. So, you see, is basically you want to see. So I remember I said is you need to have some concept. They have a big idea and they have a small subcomponent. So here, socialization, coping, and relaxation are the sub-factors or sub-component of the coffee drinking motivation. Again, some tips about item generation. Focus on single issue, not double-barreled one. So the idea of double barrel comes from some guns have two barrels, and we basically we don't want to have two opinions. So one item you don't want to give two different opinions, two different view. Here, I drink coffee to have a fun and to socialize with friends. So it has two different things in one phrase. Consistent perspective. Basically, it is about what person think. It's not about what friends think. Here is like, my friends have fun when we drink coffee together. I have fun when I drink coffee with my friends. So you don't need to have that in the one same statement. Simple and short item. You could, I don't want to read, but you could see from this one is very wordy and is very confusing when you read it. And you don't need to give lots of information to the, you don't want to confuse basically your reader. Avoid negative and reverse scored items. So double negative ones. So like I usually don't drink when I'm upset. So don't use these. These are some sorts of tips I gather from the other articles and the papers. And also some people, they use reverse scored items, but recently there finds is quite confusing for the people when they, particularly when you first time you want to develop a scale. I think it's a better idea to use the reverse score items when there's a long survey and you want to be sure that the participant answering your question right. but also might be some researcher might have different opinion on that. But personally, I think for the scale development one, we shouldn't use the reverse scored items. Make a sense in other culture or languages. So that's very important. So when you're developing a construct for first time, you develop a scale for the first time, that scale can be applied in different cultures. It shouldn't be just North American view of that. It needs to be in other culture, other language, and it needs to make sense. Particularly when you do back translate for some of the items, you need to maybe think about, maybe you could ask some people in other languages, if you back translate it, does it make sense in your language? So we need to be careful of that bit as well. Again, in item generation, is the content validity and adequacy is quite important. After we have a pool of items generated, just more here, I'm going more details, which kind of tools you could use for the item generation step. After you gather all this interesting items from to measure a particular concept. So you could do focus group, and interviews, as I said, is qualitatively basic. Some people start doing Delphi. Delphi is a quite interesting approach for the scale development because you have a panel rating and you involve experts here. So it's quite interesting one. So in panel rating, normally you ask a judge to look at the items you develop, and they based on, by referring to the definition, how representative is this particular concept or concepts in their view. Some researchers, they use survey of expert judge. This is quite hard to do because you might need to find 200, 300 of experts in a particular field to do that. That's why it seems like people, they go with the focus group and interviews and less with the survey of experts. But again, it depends on your research and availability and etc. So there is no wrong or right. And also, before I forget, and this is very important to look at recent paper published when you want to do scale development papers and see which kind of advancement happened in this procedure. Hope so far we're doing fine. And I'm not boring you.
Babak, we do have a question on Facebook.
Yes.
So there's a question which says that, can you please comment on the importance of scale development with different cultural settings? I mean, is there a need for a new scale development within Chinese, Indian, Iranian cultural settings to measure customer experience or engagement?
Yes, I am very much on that. And I think it's very important to looking at different culture and see if for example, in Asian culture is a scale we need to capture. For example, thinking about an Asian culture, we have this field view. So people can be interested in, they have particular behavior. So we don't have that in European or let's say American culture. So we could develop that, but it depends on how you what you want to find out. Is this important? Are you going to find the people to answer your questions? And also you need to think about where you want to sort of send your paper, when you want to publish your paper. Do you think if you focus in a particular culture, you can publish in high-ranked journals? So you need to think about all these aspects. It's not easy. And I think, again, I mentioned in the beginning, you need to do your homework before start doing the applying the different culture and different, even start doing the scale development procedure. Right, I continue that. So now in step 3, item reduction. Right, before going to item reduction, I think what is very important to have a little bit of thought about questionnaire administration. So you need to be really careful who you are, your participants, and how you're gonna administrate your survey. Particularly for scale development, which is very sensitive, and if you do wrong in one stage, it's gonna influence the other steps. So you really need to be careful about you know, how to administrate your survey and how you're approaching other people. Some tips is develop a simple and clear direction. Keep short, but clear. Particularly, I'm not going into the detail. There is a big argument going on at the moment about common method bias. So you need to be careful of not using ambiguous statements. Also, you need to, when you're doing the survey, you need to be clear, give clear direction to the people. Not the same two people in the same room should answer your, you know, your questionnaire. Maybe they influence their behavior, their, you know, their chat, etc. I'm just looking at some questions here.
So Babak, there is, you should be able to see this chat icon or participants. So there's a question from a participant saying that, aren't scales supposed to be culture specific to achieve your goal?
Yeah, you need to be that. Yeah, you need to be careful of that. If it's you need to, again, this is a question of looking at the previous studies and looking at the items by asking your friends from other languages and culture, looking at your items. That is why when we do in the first stage, when we do the item generation, is we ask the items from different nationalities. It's better to ask items from different nationalities to see if they make sense in their culture and etc. So that's very important part of it. Again, there's no right or wrong answer, but it's just doing the best homework and approaching the best ways possible.
Thank you. Yeah, what I'm thinking is I'll note down all the questions and I'll ask you all these questions in the end so that we do not interrupt you while you are going
on. Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. So highlight time frame or other parameters if applicable. It means like when you are asking people in this example I gave you about the coffee consumption in last 30 days, if you ask the people's behavior in a particular time frame, because normally people, they remember what happened last month. But maybe if you ask questions about 2-3 years ago, they might not remember. So give them some sort of time frame. Population of interest, you need to focus. Some journals, they don't like student sample, for example. You could use it for some stages, but not other stages. The main stage, particularly for validation, they don't accept that. So you need to be careful of that. Also, adequate sample size. Plus 200 is good for the first stage, which is the reduction stage, which I will explain shortly. But some say minimum 10 people per item should be rule of thumb. But again, depend of the accessibility of your data. If your data is organizational, is a consumer data, and and depends on which journal you're sending. Pilot testing is very important. Again, although you do at the first two stage, but still you need to do pilot tests with a couple of people to see if this all makes sense. So yes, so in the first stage, basically you do the exploratory factor analysis. So you want to see if there's some sub-concepts based on the theory exist. I don't explain more about the exploratory factor analysis. I'm sure most of you know. But when you're doing this stage, you want to find about unidimensionality and multidimensionality, because, but also you need to, whatever you find it needs to have some theoretical underpinning. You cannot just do the factor analysis for sake of doing it. It needs to have some good theoretical underpinning. Why different exploratory factor analysis rotation? Again, this is the question you need to think about. Look at the textbook. They explain why different rotation, or maybe you need to use for different purposes. Again, it's happened in a past reviewer asked why that particular rotation, why not other one? You need to be clear about the rotation you're going to use for exploratory factor analysis. Example again here, as I said before, about coffee drinking motivation, socially motivated drinking, copy motivated drinking, and relaxation motivated drinking. So these are the important parts. So when we do the factor analysis, we item loaded in different factors. You need to do Cronbach alpha of each of those factors you have. And also you need to think about the factor loadings of each of the items under the particular factor needs to be more than 0.5. And also you need to do the correlation matrix between the factors, which is again, these are the normal procedure for doing the factor analysis anyway. So you could look at the textbook in more details about it. It comes to the next stage is stage 4, initial validation. This is very important part of the scale development procedure. So far, you look at the qualitatively, and based on literature, you look at the domain of the definition and item generation, and you had the first stage of using proper statistic was the item reduction stage. Now the moving on to the item validation. So initial validation, as I said before, some people, they don't do the final stage, they stop in the stage 4. Confirmatory factor analysis you do here is different than the exploratory factor analysis. Is basically what we want to say by doing the confirmatory factor analysis. What's my point here is exploratory factor analysis doesn't guarantee reliability and validity of the construct. So you do confirmatory factor analysis. Basically, you want to verify the factor structure of set of observed variable. So CFA allows you to research to test hypothesis that a relationship between the observed variable and their underlying latent construct exists. Basically, so we had a coping, relaxation, and socially motivated concept. We find these bits from our exploratory factor analysis, and now in the confirmatory factor analysis or conjuric measurement model, some say you need to look at the loading and errors. Loadings should be more than 0.7 here. And also what is important to look at the covariance between coping, relaxation, sociality, socially motivated coffee drinking behavior. So between all these 3 components. what is important here, if you have a high covariance between, let's say, coping and relaxation, that is one of the indicators of which I explain later on. You might have a discriminant validity issue. So this is very important. Sometimes in confirmatory factor analysis, you get a small loading. So you need to see how you deal with this. There are different ways of dealing with the small loadings. It's not something I could cover today, but please look at the confirmatory factor analysis literature to see how you deal. Sometimes you could co-vary some of the errors, etc. So basically, when in the confirmatory factor analysis, you want to make sure about the dimensionality of the construct. We move to the exploratory factor. What is important here? We haven't looked at the fit, goodness of fit yet. We look at the dimensionality by doing confirmatory factor analysis, but also there are some indications of different fits, goodness of fits indicators. This is which is part of doing confirmatory factor analysis. I took this from the Hare's book about basically for different sample size, you have and different indicators, number of observed variables, you have different goodness of fit, different chi-squares. Again, I leave this, you could look at later on. But as I said, it's sensitive for the sample size, etc. So you really need to be careful of, at the same time, explain that in your paper. Because if you have or research, if you have a PK external for the PhD student, you have a PK internal external examiner, or PK reviewers for the people who want to publish the papers, they will ask you about this small but very important issues. I will also encourage you to do the invariance test. So what is the invariance test? You want to see an invariance test can be used to indicate whether a series of items test the same variable among the different groups. So what you do, you want to see if there are gender differences or age differences. You can use chi-square t-test, etc. But you are looking for no differences between the groups. So that's very important, and it's part of particularly new last couple of 5-6 years. This becomes norms, and most of the papers you'll see the invariance tests doing the scale development part. So validity assessment is, again, I go through very short. I'm conscious of time a little bit. Convergent validity, demonstrating the measurement correlate positively with different measures of the same construct. So what we do here, Cronbach-Alfie, normally we do Cronbach-Alfie and composite reliability and average variance extracted. You could do, you also need to do discriminant validity, which is basically doing correlation. Here you want to see establishing that construct doesn't significantly correlate with other constructs. Normally they use is a Farner-Lacker creation people use, but there are new advancement in this field as well. Particularly people are using PLS, HTMT as a new discriminant validity on top of the Farner-Lacker creation. Also, we need to do nomenological or predictive validity. Here, what we want to do is basically, as I said in the beginning, you have overarching theory. Based on that overarching theory, you focus on a particular concept. Now, based on within that overarching theory, you want to test the construct you developed has some other construct has impact on your developed construct, and are there any consequence of that. So again, you need to base this based on an overarching theory. So in our case of coffee drinking, if is people's, let's say, cultural capital has influence on their drinking behavior, and drinking behavior has influence on their personal satisfaction or daily based satisfaction. So this is an important part of when you want to do validity assessment. Again, I leave this for you guys to look at it later on, but there are just some cutoff points for the convergent validity and discriminant validity. Again, look at the Hairbook. Hairbook is quite good for this and explains what are these concepts in more details and what are the recommended cutoff points. Again, this is a new approach. It's not new, but I've seen a couple of papers that start using this approach. Meta-analytic approach, basically, for doing the external validity. So using correlation test, the correlation between all the items you have and the global item or the main item. So the main item here for us, drinking coffee helps me to cope, relax, and socialize. So you have a concept based on the definition of what is coffee drinking behavior. In your case, it can be something about branding. What is the brand personality definition? And based on that, you could say there are some components inside that. So you want to find correlation between this particular global item and all those items. You want to see, are they correlated? So you're looking for the correlation. This is like a meta-analytic approach and being used in a couple of papers recently for assessing the external validity. Now, coming to the final stage, or as I say, some people, they miss out this stage. So you validated your construct, initial validation, you use the predictive validity, nominal validity, but you haven't tried that in other contexts with other samples, or asking your participant to look at it after a couple of months to see if there is sort of differences between this initial validation and final validation stage. For the final validity, or some people call it replication state, as I said, scale never valid and reliable. You need to apply and you need to use it in other contexts. So because your context was very specific, just for sake of developing the scale. Valid and reliable to varying degrees. So again, there are some argument and some sort of suggestion regarding this. Need for ongoing tests, as I said, you need to test it in other independent sample. But sometimes for some people, they don't do that, and they approach retest reliability. So you had 400 sample in the initial validation stage. You can approach the same participant after 2-3 months, follow-up study with the same participant, and you do some sort of t-test and see if there is significant differences between these different period of time there. I just explained 2 examples of my papers I published in the 12-minute papers in scale development very quickly. One is ceremonial politeness in consuming food in the visiting friends and relative tourism, scale development paper I did in Service Industries Journal. Basically, this was the idea come up to my mind about ceremonious politeness. So for this one, remember I said you need to do inductive or deductive. This one was more inductive approach here because it wasn't a clear definition of ceremonious politeness. We need to define the ceremonious politeness first, looking at, for example, Goffman's social interaction theory and SAP, so taking out something from there. Basically, this happens when you go to somebody's, showing good manners to please others. So you go to somebody's house, you have a food there, because you are polite, you don't want to refuse eating there. I'm sure it happens lots of people, and when you go to some people and houses and you're impolite to eat their foods and etc. But there's a as I said, you need to find overarching theory. I look at the psychological psychology theory. There are attributional theory and sort of guilt theory supporting this overarching and gluing all these concepts together. Self-accountability, basically when you feel sort of responsible to your behavior, perceive others' control when is sort of more important. Other people's behavior, other people's recommendation influence your behavior. Categorical self-brain is basically the negative incident of the outcome of the being in a particular behavior, and behavior one more is like a regretful behavior, if you like. So what is the reason I'm showing this is some papers now start and some journals asking about different steps you followed for the scale development. So it's good to make a sort of graphical demonstration of what is your scale development stages and how you did it. So in this paper, we had item generation and construct formation stage we had. Then we moved to the survey of reduction, initial validation we had, and also we replicated in another country. So this was the stage we followed. And I think is if you want to publish, it is good to have this graphical demonstration, because sometimes in scale development papers, it gets a little bit messy. It's better to give the indicator by sort of showing the process in a graphical way. These were the items I escaped that. Coming to the other paper again, the reason I'm not going to go to the detail one on this one, but I just want to give you an idea. This is so far whatever we talk, the scale development stages, they were for reflective measures. But sometimes you could do formative measures, which I explain a little bit more in detail. So the basic idea of this paper, keeping your audience presenting a visitor engagement scale, was basically when people visiting the art galleries and museum or heritage sites, they have a different way of engaging. This idea comes from consumer engagement and co-creation of value sort of theories. They bring their own knowledge. They have multiple motivation of visiting, and also they have different cultural capital. So we want to see from their lens, their view, how they engage with in the museum and art galleries. So after going to some procedure, we have this formative indicator. So formative, basically, as you could see in the up corner, is other way around. Normally for reflective, the arrows goes from the reflected construct to the items, while formative goes from items toward the formative constructs. It's a little bit like more explanation. It's better to read later on, but just because there is no internal consistency and reliability, they're not important when you look at the formative measure, but there are other tests available. Sometimes there is a greater difficulty, and also some reviewers not agree with this stage, and also the way you approach and the steps you follow for the formative factors. So a little bit more risky than reflective measures, I would say, if people want to go through the publication of that. I don't explain this paper, but it's a quite interesting paper. Again, we talked about reflective, very short, touched on the formative, what index development. There are papers like this paper in tourism. It's a quite interesting paper. about medical tourism index, slightly different than what we do with the reflective and formative. I really recommend you to have a look on this. Now, to come to the final remark and sort of closing, and I don't want to give you more headache on scale development or today is basically what is important is do the good literature review. Again, what is important to do a good literature review? No, it's not something wrong with your screen, but it's very important to do the good literature review before actually start going through the scale development steps. Follow the scale development steps by looking at the books and good articles in this. And also collecting samples, as I said, is very important. Be careful, look at the journals, published paper on scale development before going through this process. Because some, as I said, some journals, they don't like student sample, for example. So you need to be careful of that. And the final, very, very important question, do I ask this question? Do I really need to develop a new scale? Why? So you really need to answer this question before going through this whole step. Some people say, oh, is this fashion? We need to develop that or something like that. But it's mainly about contributing to field. Is the new skill is going to contribute to field, and how much is contribution to your particular field. 2 books is they're quite good books. I really recommend you, if you want to do the scale development papers, or for the PhD student, they want to go through the scale development, please read these 2 books. They are quite interesting books and quite detailed about the scale development. There are some references here. I leave you to look at it, but please, before reading those books, please read the Churchill's 1979 papers. Is one of the first paper ever written about the scale development. So I encourage you to read that paper before reading even the books. Thank you very much. Are there any question, comments, suggestion? And thank you very much for listening to today. Thank you for Jihan and Faizan for inviting me.
Thank you, Babak. I have a few questions, so I will put all the questions and then you can answer them one by one. So I'll put the questions one by one,
okay.
Right? So, there was a question about how culture impacts the scale development or something. So there's another question which is related to that. And the question says that if the cultural settings are changed, then do you think we need a new scale or validation of the previous developed scale is more than enough?
I think validation of the previous scale, again, depends on what you want to find out. What is the aim of your study? So is asking question another way. Do you think the existing scale is not capturing what you is supposed to capture in your culture? You need to answer that question first before moving on if you need to do extra validation or developing the new scale.
So I think we go back to the same point which you said, that literature review is very important to see what is being covered and what is not, right? Okay.
Exactly.
So there's another question which says that, and this question has a few parts. So the first part is, how many interviews do you think are enough for generation of items, or is it only up to the saturation point?
Is up to saturation point. If it depends on the which qualitative analysis you're going to use. If it's like a grounded theory, is different. If it's thematic analysis, is different. Content analysis is different. Again, you need to look at which approach you use. If it's a concept never developed, you go through the grounded theory approach. Very, very inductive approach. So it depends what you want to find out. But it's normally is between 30 interviews should be enough. But again, there is no right and wrong answer.
Okay, thank you. And then there's a question which says that on average, how long does it take to develop a scale? I have been given 6 months to develop a scale from step 1 to 5 and applying the scale. Do you think it's achievable?
I give example of my previous one. For ceremonious politeness, collecting data took us around 4 months. And then we had then we have a follow-up one as well, another 2 months. So just collecting data, it took us like 4-5 months. And then you need to analyze it and write the paper. So maybe you can do, but from my experience, it takes around a year to write.
Right. And I'll just add here that it also depends on what do you do in those steps. So I mean, the first item generation, if you are doing interviews, it may take less time as compared to if you are doing interviews, focus groups, and literature
Yes,
review.
again, yes, as I said, as you said as well, it just depends on what you want to do. So if it's that person asking question, if can drop me an email later on, explain more in detail what he's doing, or she, I could explain
Sure.
more.
Okay, so now we have another question, and this question says that it's about validation of skills, including formative or composite constructs. So he said that recently the studies identified that many of the constructs in different fields, especially when we design a scale, are composite or formative instead of reflective. What should we do for validation of this type of scale? Because most of the things you mentioned are for reliability and validity of reflective scales, not composite or formative. So what is your suggestion?
Yeah, so there are a couple of papers you need to read before doing that. And also there was a very interesting special issue like 2-3 years ago, maybe more, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, in Journal of Business Research. And they look at this issue and to see if the scale being used before they are reflective and formative. But newly, I see a couple of papers in Journal of Management, and they are arguing we shouldn't, we need to go through the process. We need to try different contexts a couple of times. If it's not working, then if we decide there is a problem with the scale. And again, it depends what you how you want to approach this. It depends on the field and the measure being used. Sometimes some measures give you good reliability and validity. For example, Hofstede's items, normally Hofstede's cultural organization and culture normally gives you good reliability and validity, but there are issues with that. So it depends what you want to capture here.
Okay. I think there's another question which we can ask, and for the other questions, if there are any questions, you can type for all the people. If not, you can always email Dr. Babak and he'll be happy to answer. So this question says that first order versus second order for a multidimensional construct. When do we choose if we should keep them as like first order or should we move to second order?
So again, it depends on the factor analysis, depends on exploratory factor analysis, confirmatory factor analysis, and what you want to do there. Look at the recent 2-3 recent paper published in Tourism Management Journal. They look at this issue. But there is, I need to see the data, and also I need to see what is the theoretical underpinning behind if you want to do formative or reflective, or if it's 2-dimensional or 1-dimensional, if you want to do second order, first order with items. It depends on it all depends on the literature review. If literature reviews doesn't support that, you shouldn't go through that. And it's maybe your data is saying that, but the literature says something else. So
okay,
be careful of that.
All right, and I have a question as well. So my question is, and if you can answer this very quickly. So normally when people develop scales, they do have exploratory factor analysis and then they follow it with confirmatory factor analysis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think if you have only one data set, like if you have collected data once, that can be used for EFA and then CFA?
You could do that. Some people, they do that, then they divide their sample.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So for exploratory factor analysis, I've seen a couple of papers that for exploratory factor analysis, they use the first 50% of the sample, I'm just saying. And for the confirmatory one, they used another 50% of the sample. So you do that, but recently I've seen some journals, they don't accept that anymore.
Right. All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Babak. There's no more questions at this time. Okay, there's a question. I don't know if you want to answer this or not, but there's a question which just came in and it says that what's a good correlation coefficient for testing retest reliability? So,
sorry,
okay, the question says that what is a good correlation coefficient for testing the retest reliability?